You missed the days of being up behind the podium?
I thought I was going to miss it. Yeah, I'm enjoying what Andy said. We're all keep after doing one thing or another, so it kind of keeps me in contact.
It's just enough.
Yeah. Don't want to do this every month.
Yeah. Every once in a while it's good, just to bug out.
Sure, yeah.
Make a good pastor, quit your day job. Wow.
Jacob in the green shoes and you were young.
I think so. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
I want to thank all of you that a lot of you've been here all day. And boy, have we learned some lessons. Yes. Lots of lessons learned. People need to go eat. Amazing. People need to eat. Amazing. People get thirsty. Amazing. But we've had a lot to pack in today, and it's been so neat. I'm so grateful to Norberto and Virginia, and they will be, and this is my new buddy. I think I didn't introduce my new buddy. Anyway, they'll be over at the community center in Walsenburg tomorrow. So, and you can just talk to them one-on-one, 2-on-10, whatever. So, where did you go? So, you probably have figured this out from me because, I see people, look at people, hear people that I think would be so neat. They should be part of my life. Kate Perdoni was one of them. And I kept hearing mutual friends of ours say, "You mean you don't know Kate? You haven't met Kate yet? What's with this? You and Kate are not?" Well, Kate and I are.
Yeah, what was with that
What
anyway?
was with that? Kate and I are. This is the first time we met in person, but we've been friends maybe 6 months now. And she does amazing things. We both share our love of the San Luis Valley. And she has just done amazing programs, amazing work, lived in a car and cleaned out ditches. She doesn't tell you about that. And Kate's with PBS. She's just got a wonderful new promotion at PBS, and I am so grateful for being here. I think there's work that we have to do here that is archival work, and our history is so palpable that what Kate's doing, what we're doing, all fits together. So this is my friend, Kate Perdoni. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you. Good afternoon. It is such an honor to be here in La Vida. I am with Rocky Mountain PBS, and I've been there for almost a decade. I started as a lowly underwriting producer, so I made 15-second commercials as a part-time employee, and then worked my way up over the years to be able to produce full-length documentaries from concept to broadcast, which is a total awesome skill to have in your back pocket. I've spent a lot of time, I lived in the San Luis Valley for years in my 20s, left to go on tour and be a musician and do all these other things, have my amazing son Leo, who's over here in the corner running audio for me today. Thank you, Leo. And I was able to work at KRZA during my early years as a reporter, so I traveled around the San Luis Valley and the Four Corners and all over the Southwest. It was my whole education as a young person. My van broke down in Taos, the classic story, when I was 21 years old on tour, and I just said, I'm going to stay here. and got the job in Alamosa, worked there for years, and that was, again, my whole education. I feel like I was put here for a reason, to learn and to help share, this incredible stories and history that are so unique and special to not just this region, but really the world. As every year goes by, my deep appreciation for these uninterrupted lineages of land and water stewardship that go back to the Iberian Peninsula, and all of these incredible, spiritual, religious, linguistic, heritage, culinary practices, all of it represents, uninterrupted lineages of bringing these things forward from eons, millennium, maybe even the beginning of time if we think about irrigation history. In the last few years, I mentioned I left and came back to Colorado. So I live in Colorado Springs and also have a place in Costilla, so I go back and forth. And the last few years, I've been very lucky to return to the San Luis Valley. When I was working in radio, I always said how ironic that I'm reporting on the most beautiful place in the world, but I can't show people. This was especially kind of before the days of multimedia reporting. There weren't as many news blogs, so I was kind of describing and bringing forth the landscape in an audio sense, which always felt like a little lacking. But now, it can be done, but to really showcase, the actual beauty of the place without having to verbally describe it is a luxury now that I'm in television. So the last few years, I've been back and forth to the San Luis Valley, made this is my reporting from all over the state over the last 2.5 years. And when you kind of zoom in, you can see all the little points. So up there is kind of the city in Colorado Springs. And then down here is the valley, the San Luis Valley. So clearly you can see we are missing some pivotal dots over here in the Walsenburg-La Veta area. So I'm hoping by being here today, I can begin to learn some of the stories and elements of your own community that you would like to bring forward to the state or larger arenas. So I'm going to share a few of the pieces that I've worked on recently and tell you a little bit about them. Although they are not quite regionally specific to this exact place, they are nearby and also, play into a lot of the things we've talked about today in terms of identity and heritage and many of the different traditional practices that folks still employ today. I did want to say thank you so much to Sandy and all the folks who put this together and who have worked so hard to maintain that these stories are in the front periphery of, or not even the periphery, but in the front of everyone's book on La Veta, on Walsenburg, on this area. The first time I came to La Veta was actually with KRZA back when the train was, I think it was 2006 maybe-ish, when the train came back to town and I rode the first train here as a young journalist. I have a funny story about that day, but maybe I'll share that later. I also want to acknowledge that none of the work that I do at all ever would be possible without your ancestors, my ancestors, their mentors, my mentors, and all the many people who have been researching these topics and histories for decades and compiling, and Virginia, who goes to the National Archives and brings that work back into books and articles and things that, are a conglomerate of so much history, and all the folks who have put the history together, have a luxury to tap into those resources now. So the wealth of information that I'm personally able to access, because so many different historians have spent and dedicated their lives to this work, is like phenomenal. So I just want to thank everyone for their contributions in that arena. I tell Virginia all the time, I would never be able to do what I do if not for you. She in particular, Virginia Sanchez, has taken every possible question I could have about how the land grant became privatized, or what was it like to be a fly on the wall during this nebulous post-treaty, pre-territorial era, that folks lived through here. And in her book, Pleas and Petitions, she really answers almost every question I ever had about that particular juncture of time. Virginia appears in a lot of my documentary work, as well as some other regional historians, but just amazing extra kudos to Virginia Sanchez for allowing me and others to do this work particularly. So I'll just show a bit of my work from around the region. And we can begin with, let's see, yeah. Just in general, I guess I'll start by saying too, I am the co-director of journalism at Rocky Mountain PBS, so we have a team of about 15 journalists who are primarily Metro Denver focused, but we're trying to get out into the state more, and so hopefully a lot of this work serves as leverage to create more media around the state as well. But we have a really cool team based out of Denver. If any of you are ever in that neck of the woods, please reach out to me and I can give you a tour of our offices or show you around up there. So this is just a Google map. So each one of these points represents a different story that was reported. In some cases, so I do video work and also write. So each one of these points is an article as well as a short form documentary or a long form documentary. The videos range from 3 to 60 minutes. Recently, I was up in Saguache. A lot of my spare time is spent conducting oral histories in the region, and just to have, you know, large scale, long form interviews from folks on record so that we can save those for future generations and also archive them. So a lot of times I'll go to a community, I'll spend a day talking to elders and folks and just getting to know them so that they're comfortable with me coming back to do an interview. So I was in Saguache and I was speaking with Patsy Garcia, who's 90 years old and grew up there and has lived there her whole life. I did a pre-interview with her and I said, can I come back and interview you tomorrow? And she said, well, sure, but I'm making 100 sopapillas for the Cinco de Mayo celebration. And I said, well, I'll definitely be there then. So in addition to doing the oral history, and I'm also working on a long form documentary with some women in Saguache about some of their embroidery and culture practices. So as a side story, I put this together.
Would you give me a cup of water? But you know this stove has to be warm, so it keeps it warm.
Oh.
Shall I serve them now or should I make them wait?
I was gonna say that might not have been the right one to show first. I know, and then everybody that was watching it internally at my job was like, there's some serious like hunger, you know, happening here as we're looking through your work. Everyone who had anything to do with this before it went out to publish remarked on how hungry they were after they saw it. So I'm trying a lot to document. I've documented traditional Orno and Chico's practices, and just trying to go out and spend as much time as I can with folks as they're harvesting and creating and making. A lot of times I'll spend, you know, a really long time with people. There are farmers and ranchers that I've been working with kind of for years, just documenting ongoing practices so that someday I can make, a long form documentary about just them in particular, or, practices in general. But again, just trying to gather as much as I can while we have so much incredible wisdom and knowledge to garner from. One of the topics that was brought up at several points today was the history of indigenous enslavement or Native American enslavement that was in the region. 20 years ago, when I first started reporting here, no one was talking about that. And I, as a very naive, young white person, didn't really understand why it wasn't a celebrated history or why people wouldn't want to claim their Native American roots or heritage. It was very taboo at many times to go deeper into that conversation. It seemed everyone that I was working with had a Native American relative, but when you implored deeper into that lineage, they didn't want to talk about it. And it took me a really long time to understand how the duality of having both oppressor and oppressed within you, or the heritage of identity, and what that carries and brings forward. And then now to be 2023, to have people actually talking about this history, having exhibits about it, starting to take DNA tests and look at the heritage and look at the bigger picture of it. I honestly never thought that I would live through a time where those conversations were brought into the public arena in a way that felt safe for people and okay for people to talk about. So I feel like I'm getting to witness this evolution of dialogue. I think the DNA tests have played a big part of it. But yeah, we have talked about, and Noborto was talking about, kind of the after effects of what occurred, the genocide that occurred on this land, the boarding schools, the oppressor-oppressed identity issues, and how that all creates into, a very complicated story to tell. I feel very fortunate in that my line of work with documentary filmmaking is really encouraging and supporting people in telling their own stories. So working very in depth with communities, individuals, and families, from everything on archival and research to, making sure the story is being told the way that they want it to be told, and that if it does go out to the public and it is released on Rocky Mountain PBS channels, that it's something that they're in full support of and feel truly reflects who they are and what they've been through. So I've done a number of pieces surrounding that history. One that is probably the most, we won't watch the whole thing, but we can watch a little bit of this one. So this is actually at the Lafayette Head Home and Indian Agency in Conejos, is where this picture was taken. There's Leo and I over here in the corner. So Leo got to learn how to adobe plaster. This was actually 2 summers ago. After following the history of Native American enslavement in the region, this is one of the epicenters of that economy, let's say. So when Ron Rael, who's a local architect in Conejos County, he splits his time between California and here, but he purchased this property, figured out what it was, and then embarked on this journey to gather the community, people who share this heritage, and adobe, plasters and folks from all over the world to restore the building and bring education and history and healing to the community as well as, the world at large. So it's a story I've been following for years, and then at this point was able to produce something. So we won't watch the whole thing, but maybe just a few minutes of this.
These are well-known stories of indigenous slavery, and that this is kind of the epicenter of where that happened.
There's something about working together that really feeds the community and makes it grow.
The project about healing this place, and how do we tell the story and uncover those truths?
This is such a complicated, nuanced story.
We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to know about it. Yeah. I think that's it.
This exhibit really discusses and explores the history of indigenous activity that we know took place in the San Luis Valley and in southern Colorado. The way that we have uncovered a lot of
connections and helping them to understand the past so that they can come to terms with it or to actually be validated by these stories that they were true.
N-A-V-A-J-O-E. This is an attempt to use art to give people an opportunity to have a conversation that the powers that be don't want to be had.
They just want to talk about the happy outcome. And that wasn't true for everybody who was in this region. There were no happy outcomes for the people who were displaced and the people who lost their culture and their traditions and their livelihoods. People need to know this history.
For the past 68 years, the space has been an exhibition dedicated to the colonialist settler narrative, and after 68 years, they decided to censor a different narrative.
We have changed direction. We originally had a Kit Carson exhibit throughout this space and representation of his life and what it would have been like here. We are now shifting the focus from Kit Carson to the people who actually live here and have their lives affected.
We know that where we were at was home to different indigenous communities. Of course, they knew the Apache. The fort sits in the shadow of Mount Blanca, Cisnajini, which is one of the four sacred mountains of the Navajo. We know that this space that we're in is the northern edge of the Spanish frontier. It was later Mexico. And then after the Treaty of Guadalupe, Hidalgo becomes the United States.
And indigenous people were part of the trade. They were considered commodities and they were sold, bought and sold. Raids were made upon the indigenous people and they were sold to wealthy people who could afford to have domestic help and also labor. And so they were taken from their tribe and assimilated into Spanish life or whether it was a different tribe's life and just basically robbed of any of their indigenous cultures that they carried with them. I have a personal connection to that history. I have an ancestor who was an indigenous captive. My great-great-grandmother, her whole family was killed except for her and her young daughter. And so she really didn't have anything to go back to once they did sell her off. However, she knew she didn't want to be there and she ran away several times and kept bringing her back. So at some point she had to accept her fate and that she wasn't going to be able to leave or escape and go back to where she came from. I feel like there's a lot of stories similar to that, and so we started this work to find those stories. Kit Carson was part of that story because he did have his own indigenous son as well, assimilated into his own family.
Juan Carson was enslaved by Kit Carson. By 1870, Juan sat for a portrait. He belonged in this house in a big, powerful way, having lived here. On the right is Gabriel Woodson. He was 12 when that photo was taken, and within a few years had become a hardcore alcoholic who, by his late teens, I think, had been shot and murdered in a car fight. But it's fascinating coming from a history of enslaved people and realizing that both predating African slavery and post-dating African slavery, was the movement of Native people.
After the Emancipation Proclamation, there is rumor or word in Washington, D.C. that there's this practice in the West of indigenous people being held captive. Directions were given to Indian agents in the West to really try to understand how widespread this practice was. This is a list of Indian captives who have been purchased for the services of the citizens of Pinellas County or the citizens of Costilla County. Under the column that is labeled name of Indian, these are Spanish names, right? Or in some cases, maybe an Anglo name. Certainly not the person's given names. And so immediately, we can think about, identity being stripped away, right? And that disconnection from, where someone is from. This document is a census that was taken in 1865 by Lafayette Head, who's the Indian agent in Pinellas County. He was responsible in some ways as an ambassador to the Indians, but as an ambassador, he was also complicit in maybe keeping the youths kind of a really fragile state, near starvation, a welfare state, really. We know now that he had captives in his home, that those don't appear on the census. Not only does he not list his own captives on the list, but in the letter that he writes to Governor Evans, he calls this practice barbarous and inhumane, and indicates that this is a practice that has been practiced by Mexicans for generations. So he's really outraged, right, in this letter to the governor, and yet isn't completely transparent. We know just from that example that this list is incomplete.
But one time the military thought that Ted made most of his money based on the sale of indigenous slaves. So that may be one motivation. By 1870, he was the richest man in Puentes County. Both of these were operators, of course, are National Archives. There's a note in the archives that is just a half-page long, and all it says on it is that he's accused of selling Navajo children. And it was determined that Ted had withheld government provisions from the Indians, had speculated in government property, and that his interpreter was not proficient to speak English. In this captain's research, and due to genetics today, we know that he had had several illegitimate children by indigenous persons and sons. And he was the longest running Indian agent in Colorado. He held that position for 8 years.
I knew of Lafayette, but I never knew that the house was here. We are sitting in the building that's part of the compound that was called the Puentes Indian Agency. There's a sawmill and gristmill that was just right there. Lafayette documented indigenous slavery in Puentes and Costilla County in northern Mexico. And it's in this house that he made those lists of all the children who were held in the households throughout this region. My family has lived in Puentes County for at least 6 or 7 generations, and we still live in the same village. I would say that I grew up fairly traditionally. The majority of people spoke Spanish as a first language, and many people didn't speak English. My grandparents, my great-grandparents. After the Mexican-American War, there was a lot of opposition for anything south of the Arkansas River to be part of the state because it was considered too Mexican. And of course, New Mexico took a long time to become a state also because it was also considered too Mexican. It was like Puerto Rico at the time. It's something else. We are not only people who identify as Mexicanos, but in that word, it's so charged with lots of different meanings of our mestizaje, our mixed indigenous heritage, our Spanish colonial heritage, and conflicts that I think exist within all of us related to those two lineages coming together. I think it's within these complex stories that this property and this compound emerges. This is a site of trauma in a number of ways, spiritually, culturally. The room that we're in now was thought to be the slave quarters, and that's through oral history that story has continued. I actually want to think about how we're excavating those truths and revealing them and talking about things that might be painful to talk about. Speak that truth, I think, is an important step in healing. I think share that story also through creativity, art, and design. I am an artist, a professor. I have this deep interest in just the architecture of the region. The next thing we're going to be doing is doing an earth plaster workshop on the outside. People from all walks of life are going to come and reassign mud to different buildings. We can take on our traditional knowledge to heal these buildings.
So, there's Leo. I'll pause here. So this documentary goes on to detail the process of Adobe restoration. So there's some blueprint in there of how, the adobe process works, how to create adobe bricks or how to plaster, and it kind of walks through with the professionals who came and gathered on this weekend how to go about doing that. So it's sharing, the history of the repairing of the home as well as the repairing of the history of the community. So it kind of just goes through, and I'll send this link too, so that if you want to come back and watch any of the full pieces of these later on, you can. And I just wanted to share one more clip. And as Ron mentioned in that, a lot of the histories of many of our communities are anecdotally related or, through oral history. And so, documenting them at this time just creates a greater importance or relevance to continuing those stories on. As we all know, we live in a tradition of oral histories, and although many documents and things have been unearthed and still exist, capturing the words and the spoken words of folks is a totally different paradigm in terms of how that information is passed on and the spiritual and emotional and historical weight. One of the farmers who I've spent a lot of time with is Charlie Quintana in San Acacio Viejo near San Luis. He is a lifelong farmer and rancher in that area. He also served as the water commissioner for the acequias of the Culebra watershed for almost 30 years. So I've been following him around for years, trying to document every possible thing he knows. I want to learn everything from him. We take each stream system of the watershed, in stride, and he tells me everything he knows about it. And we talk to as many folks as we can. So he's one of my favorite people to work with, and I've followed him through the seasons of irrigation and farming practices, so I've collected quite a bit. This came out, I want to say, a little over a year ago, and was like the first snippet of kind of the fall this one. Yeah, let's see. Are there two in here? Yeah, let's go this way. Yeah, I'll watch this one first real quick.
Get in there. Rock and roll, lady, let's go. Fun, I've done this all my life. The thing about growing up in a farm, especially here, was that you helped. You weren't sitting inside watching TV or playing with your Nintendo or whatever. So you wanted to play, you build yourself. We were self-sustained as far as vegetables, whatever you needed. We had our sheep, beef, whatever, to kill your own. We got all kinds of pasture here. We're bringing all the cows here. We're going to bring in this next week, I think. On that. Let them eat it all. For the snowflies. They're very chilly. You didn't have it in the refrigeration. The garage was our refrigeration. You kind of there, leave it there. My mom used to say, go give me a piece of meat. And I put it for you. That was rough at the time. Now it's great, but that's the way we grew up. It's like they used to say, there's no way a human being would fly in an airplane. We're not flying in an airplane, now we're flying a jet. Unreal, so. Can't stay. If you don't have it in here, don't even try it. You know what I'm saying? If you want to be a farmer and you don't have one, the hard part, don't even try it. Because you're going to go down the drain so quick. Why are you going to get up at 4 o'clock to go away? Why are you going to be up all night trying to bail? It's a mentality that you love it, and there's very few. Now we got different types of irrigation here and everywhere else in the valley. Like we flood irrigate this. Well, I used to irrigate everything, flood irrigate, I still do. If the snow's up there, we get all that snow. We got enough irrigating water for everything, and sometimes, like lately, we haven't been able to, we don't have the water. We don't have the snow. As a farmer, you gotta know, okay, which piece of land will give you more of a product than the other. So you irrigate that, concentrate your water on that, and that's what we can do. I mean, we got that one, this one, well, we got that one, and another one in the middle, this one, and the one on the end don't know how to get anything. Because there's not enough water. And still, you know, every once in a while, if it rains, it helps. Like this summer, oh man, we had all kinds of rain, which is beautiful. We needed it. But this is all flood right here. Well, the whole farm is flood. And we're needing somebody to change our water every summer, so if you're available. This is the chute that we use for getting the water from the ditch. We get the dam on the ditch. We put the dam there to hold the water. Okay, the head gets over there by the cow. And you divert it over here. You put your dam here, and then when the ditch is full, you use this baby, like so. You fill the tube, water, right? Fill the tube, and when it's full, all you gotta do is suckens it right out. We'll use them all over. Okay, let's go. Go get the. You get so damn tired by the end of the day doing this stuff that you say to yourself, what am I doing? Look, right? It's all different. Different things people do in the world. You gotta be a little off to be a farmer. You work till, well, you work 24 hours a day almost, you know? Because you set your water and you gotta come back maybe in 3-4 hours. Okay, and then 3-4 hours you're doing something else. You're either raking or baking or whatever. When I got my dad farm, I said, what the hell? I'm still on the middle of the field, irrigating, and there goes the cars start coming in from the county, from the school, 4 o'clock in the evening. Still got another 6-7 hours of work. You know? And I couldn't figure it out. What the heck is going on? What am I doing wrong? And there wasn't that I was doing wrong. What I was doing was different than him. You got an 8-hour job? I don't. I got a 24-hour job. That's heck of a difference. And like I said, you got to get it off. And like I tell my grandkids, they're the ones that are going to take over anything. There's nothing wrong in learning to farm. There's nothing wrong with it. You can learn it, anybody can learn it. If you want to. But if you're going to be a farmer that for 8 hours, you're not going to be a farmer. Because it's not going to happen. You know? You got to go with whatever's there. And this is seasonal also to a point to where you got to get your hay up. You know? And you got to get the hay up there for the animals to eat in the winter. Because this is beautiful now, but if it snows 2-3 feet, that's on the ground, under the snow. So there's no feed. So you got to feed them. When we come back, I'll hook onto the trigger and you can load it. How's that? You don't have to do it. Try it.
Charlie. So that's Charlie, and yeah, we've spent a lot of time together. I feel very lucky to learn from him and just yeah, couldn't really ask for a better job or be more fortunate than to spend time with the folks I do. So one of the big things that I've learned through the last few years of capturing this documentary work, as you all know, is there's a huge gap between the next generation of students who are in school, who are not learning about these things necessarily. Some of them are in the summer because of their families, but sometimes this cultural or heritage, traditional water and land stewardship practices can skip a generation. I mean, I'm preaching to the choir, but a lot of times people leave, you know, for economic opportunities, and if they do return to the communities, they may not come until their later years, so sometimes there's a gap between transferring that knowledge. For myself, in wanting to, as I'm learning all of this incredible stuff, I'm thinking, wouldn't it be cool if we could bring the youth along or forge that connection somehow? So there are a number of youth groups in San Luis who work hard to facilitate relationships intergenerationally. And for myself, I started a film program at San Luis Centennial High School last year to be able to go into the schools and work with the amazing students there who are so artistically talented. It blows my mind. The tradition of artistry in, you know, I'm speaking about San Luis, but really everywhere around here, but these students are just absolutely brilliant. I'm getting goosebumps even just talking about it. But it is an absolute joy to be able to go into the school and work with those students to help them create their own media projects about these things with their own families, to facilitate and support them in learning whatever they want to learn. And then if they want to share that with the world, that's great. But a lot of times I also recognize there's a sanctity and a beauty in keeping those stories to us and to our families and to our communities. So sometimes it's a small community event or a family is sharing this information. It really is based on how the individual wants to share their and document their lives and their ancestors and their families and what they want to do with it. So I work in the schools outside of PBS, so there's not a mandatory feeling that anyone has to give content to PBS or that it's for any other end other than, you know, young folks being able to dig in and utilize technology and the wisdom in their own communities while they're still living here. And it's something that I hope I get to do forever because it's truly my favorite thing. So other pinpoints on here that I've worked a lot on, if you've heard of the Maestas case in Alamosa, it was actually one of the earliest school desegregation cases in the whole nation in 1914. Did a big documentary about that. So there's so many things here. I spent a lot of time researching the Sangre de Cristo land grant and the moment in time where the span of years in which it went from a communally held land to subdivisions, essentially. There are so many lingering legalities that are still in court today from the two systems clashes of when the Vara or Extensiones land system that was part of the land grant was met with the PLSS grid slapped over top of it. It created a lot of bizarre land holdings and chunks of land and pieces of land that have been contested in court literally since that day until now. The most recent one of those court cases that I attended was less than a year ago, where one of those plots of land that has been in a discrepancy for almost 200 years was back in court. We all know La Sierra, Lovato versus Taylor, and there are just, and water rights too that stem from this area. All the land and water issues from the region are still in court today and have this tremendous history that I'm very lucky to get to study. I'm currently working with the Southwest Studies Department at Colorado College under a research fellowship to study the land grant managers' paperwork from that era. For many years, I wished I knew or could be a fly on the wall. How did they turn the land grant into subdivisions? Well, this guy's papers tell it all. It's literally 104 boxes of the original deeds and maps and all the original papers that are kind of shockingly still around today. And of course, because the same families live in the same area and often on the same varas that their families settled all that time ago, it's relatively easy for me to know who the people are and to understand in context what this information can mean for particular families. And I'm always calling people and saying, did you have a relative so-and-so? Or, tell me about this plot of land. And I'm very lucky that I can link the contemporary knowledge with the historical records, and there still is an overlap of clicking information. So again, I could talk about this map for a long time, and I hope I haven't spoken too much about it, but yeah, Virginia has a segment here with pleas and petitions if you want to check that out later. It's, you know, the history of the New Mexico-Colorado state line and all the incredible discrimination and just things that people had to live with and work through in order to maintain their livelihoods up until today. So I don't know if you have any questions about any of this work. I'm happy to answer. Yes.
My question basically is, were you the producer, director, everything?
Yeah.
You did could you tell me, did you use like an outline to develop it? What was your process? What was your method of madness to get this documentary done?
Which one? Any of them?
Any of them.
They're all kind of, they all stem from community input in that listening to what people want to hear about or want reflected. So it's folks who have come forward to say, we'd like to tell our story about X, Y, and Z. Usually someone asks or, you know, invites me into an arena where I can begin to learn those stories. I will say I used to outline everything and write all my scripts down. And, you know, for years when I was working on documentaries, I did have more you know, processes like that. Now it's pretty much all in my head. So I'll just go out and film as much as I possibly can. For these, it's a little different because I recognize that the oral histories that are part of these interviews, I want to keep forever. So I might interview someone for 3, 4, 5 hours. I might come back multiple times. I might have 15 hours from one person over the course of a summer. And that's not all going to go into a documentary, but I'll have known. The reason I like solo producing is because I can kind of keep track of it in my head. For one thing, these are remote places where it would be harder to bring a crew or a traditional group of videographers. For another thing, myself having earned trust here, and that was a process of, still an ongoing process of messing up and doing better and learning, and it never ends, but it's very difficult to bring other journalists or other people into the arena because I just am very protective and very trepidatious about, you know, myself being an outsider, but being associated with bringing other people into these spaces, I won't do it. So,
So I noticed you
Yeah.
had two main things. You had some narration, but then you had lots of oral interviews. Was there anything else, you know, that needs to be included in that?
it kind of depends, like what, usually it's like a historical overview, so some kind of setting the scene for where we are now. That involves, you know, Indigenous and Native American history, and for every documentary I do, that's always right at the beginning of talking about what land are we on, how did we get here, how did the next wave of people get here. So I always try to set it up in that context. And then depending on, for all these, since it is kind of bridging in the throughway of history into contemporary issues, yeah, it's usually the historical piece and then the oral histories mixed with like contemporary activity. I don't know if I'm really answering your question, but I kind of like to do a past, present, future. So it always ends with, you know, the healing element or the alternative or showcasing something that is working, something we can work toward as a community, which is why it was cool to have this Adobe workshop, because it showed the community coming together and to heal something in a way that was like showing an example for almost how others could do it or how it could be done. I don't know if I answered your question, but.
Where are the oral histories that you've done and using? Are you maybe stored somewhere in the repository?
Yeah, I just have a ton of drives, you know, and since it's just me and it's like on a weekend, Leo and I can attest to this. Leo will come with me and we'll go to someone's home and spend a good chunk of the afternoon there, and I'll just go home and file it all away and back it up, knowing that I may not revisit it for a while, but just wanting to have it and wanting to make sure I'm.
You know that CSU Pueblo has
Yeah.
the Colorado Chicano Native
Yeah.
Archives. Have you ever thought of contributing to that or
Yes.
donating any of your stuff to that? It
Yes.
seems like it would be very appropriate.
As soon as I am able to go through it all or whatever that looks like, I will give it to anyone who wants it for free. That's why I love working for PBS, is because it's understood that these are public resources, but working with the families and the communities to understand where they'd like the things placed or giving them options about all the archival institutions and places that might capture these things, and then making sure that it's what they want. And then it's my utmost priority that this is easy to access and to be used if there's another documentary filmmaker in 20 years.
Did you bring any cards with you?
Yeah, I sure did. Yeah.
So you know that you gotta keep this in mind.
Yeah, I mean, you're like number one. It's like, yeah. Yeah.
Have any of your stories been shown on PBS?
So yeah, this is Rocky Mountain PBS, which shows throughout Colorado. Some of the stuff has been picked up nationally. There have been like Emmy nominations for some of this work that then puts it on like a national arena, but yeah.
I understand that you work primarily, or it's my understanding, in the valley.
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to come east?
That's kind of why I'm here, because I am, and in all places, I'm lucky to have relationships there that I'm able to visit and go in, but I'd love to expand that, now that I have my wheels under me there. I'd love to work in other parts of the state as well. And with my, newfound role at Rocky Mountain PBS, I now am in a position to be able to bring other people with me or to add resources into that. So it's something that can be built on over time. Yeah.
You're familiar with, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right, Land Beck?
No.
From the Manitos project?
Oh, Manitos. Yep. I was going to say yep.
I brought him here about 5 years ago, and we met with a bunch of my relatives in Zedwing and Chama. He's trying to rename all the historic rivers and valleys to the original Hispanic names. Like Gardner was Cañón de Huerfano.
Yeah.
He actually has U.S. topo maps with Cañón de Huerfano and all the original Spanish names that they were.
Red Wing was what?
Red Wing was Perdoni.
Yeah.
And it was a good time.
That's awesome.
Neat to work with.
Thank you. And Manitos is awesome, and they're like also one of the number one I'd love to work with to get this stuff in there. So thank you and like some of the research I've done, it was Dutch investors who first came over to the Sangre de Cristo land grant, well, post Gilpin, but I found maps in Dutch of the original area with the original names, and like Los Plaza de los Manzanares, which is now Garcia. There are some of the original. So it is so cool when you're holding the document, it's cool. Thank you for sharing that. Any other questions or comments? And I'm also curious, if I'd like to work in your community, are there people like Charlie, or are there stories that you have, or families and people that you think would be good to direct me to? I didn't think you were going to say no, but yeah, think about it too. And I'd love to hear your suggestions now or later, or if there's anyone who wants to share any stories or share anything about this kind of work, or yes.
I think one of the things that's so interesting to me is how we're all in a circle. And the funny piece is, Carlos Atencio, Eugene Hawkins I tried to find him down in San Luis. I love fiber. I heard somebody in the valley was growing hemp. I had to talk to a lady in California to find who was growing a trial patch of hemp, which was Eugene Hawkins, who I just became friends with and adored. He said, "You've got to meet my cousin, Carlos Atencio." Carlos Atencio was one of her mentors. Carlos Atencio is over here at our event. I'll be a vendor there tomorrow. Carlos is a weaver. I love my fiber things. Just like he said, "You don't know Kate yet?" They said the same thing about Teresa de Jesus Vito. You've got to meet Teresa. You've got to meet Teresa. She's been over here, I think this is her 4th or 5th time. She's also a culchera. The ladies in San Luis that are the San Luis Culture Club ended up inviting me to be a member, which is probably one of the greatest honors I've ever had. So we do the Culture Club. Virginia Sanchez brought me this bag of culture yarn today. So, it just, the circles go, we all touch one another. And I think just like the history is so palpable in our area, our relationships to one another are so palpable in this area. And that's why we can make this happen and make it a living document rather than something that's just on a shelf someplace. So we need your stories.
Yeah.
In your travels, have you come across any copies of the Spanish newspapers that were based out of Trinidad? In the
Here, no, but El Heraldo from San Luis is one that I'm like looking for, and someone had some old copies, but not from here.
My namesake was the owner of the only Spanish newspaper in Trinidad.
Wow.
And northern New Mexico. And I've talked to Virginia about it, and she said she has never been able to find any copy.
Do you know the name of the paper?
Oh gosh, where's Virginia?
I know she's not here.
I don't right off the top of my head. It was in Spanish. Ron, do you remember?
Oh, he just left.
Oh, he just left.
But interestingly enough,
What was it?
Oh, that was the
Walsenburg, and based out of Walsenburg in Trinidad. Anyway,
I'll keep my
I'll find
eyes
out
out.
the name.
Yeah, that's great to know because I can always keep my ears and eyes out when I'm looking through things.
Trinidad's doing a program called Echoes of History or something, June 3rd and 4th. They are so interested in what we're doing up here because they feel we're ahead of the game, that they're doing a lot of artsy stuff in Trinidad, but recognize those who came before has not happened. So that will be a chance, maybe we can find out more about that. And they're really interested in our pictures and all the things that we're doing up here. So we're invited down there. It's pretty cool.
Thank you all so much for watching some of these pieces. And I'm happy to give my contact info. Yeah.
Are you sure you're Leo's mom? You're too young.
Oh, yeah, right.
You look like brother and sister. Not that Leo was old, but
I'll take it.
So come
Thank
tomorrow.
you.
It's going to be over at the movie
Yes.
theater.
Yeah, we'll have a table so you can come by and chat tomorrow if you don't have time today. So thank you so much. Thank you.
have your cards.
Yes.